Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are back at the Capablanca saga. It's the match that we've been waiting for. Raul Capablanca faces Serbian Grandmaster Borislav Kostić, a match in Cuba, Havana. And we covered a lot of ground during the Capablanca saga. We covered his match with Cuban national champion Juan Corso when Capablanca was 12 to 13, I believe the match was held during Capablanca's birthday. Then we went to his match with Frank James Marshall, then to his first big international tournament of San Sebastian, then to the big tournament in St. Petersburg. Then we covered a few smaller tournaments, a few simultaneous exhibitions. Then we covered the Rice Memorial Tournament in 1916 in New York, then the 1918 tournament in New York, also that Capablanca won. And interestingly, Capablanca faced Borislav Kostić 4 times prior to this match. Twice in the Rice Memorial Tournament in 1916 and twice in the New York Tournament of 1918. And although, okay, some of the games were quick draws, but some of them were really exciting draws, like the one that we've covered from the 1918 New York Tournament, but all 4 games ended in a draw. So it's very interesting how this match will turn out. It's basically an 8-game match, but not all 8 games were played. You'll see why this happened, and let's just enjoy the first game. So in the first game, Capablanca had the white pieces and he opened with e4. So let's see what happened in the game. Kostić replied with e5, with knight to f3 and the knight to f6. So he goes for the Petrov defense. With knight captures on e5, d6, pushing the knight back, knight to f3, and now knight captures on e4, and queen to e2. This was the most popular continuation in those days. Queen to e7, and now d3, pushing the knight back, knight to f6, and bishop to g5. And here Kostić decides to trade queens. We have queen captures, bishop captures, and now bishop to e7. Both Capablanca and Kostić are ready to castle. With knight to c3, bishop to d7, and now both players just castle. With rook f to e1 by Capablanca, and now knight to c6. Kostić just continues development with d4, and now rook f to e8. And it's interesting, after this game was played, this position has never occurred in tournament play ever since. So bishop to b5 by Capablanca, just, attacking the knight, as the knight is one of the pieces that control the center, with a6, bishop to a4, and now b5. Capablanca transfers the bishop to this bigger diagonal, but it also allows Kostić this knight to a5 move, which frees his c-pawn, but also he will be able to eliminate Capablanca's light square bishop whenever he pleases, and thus, take away the bishop pair from Capablanca. We have rook to e3, preparing rook 8 to e1. Capablanca wants to double rooks on the e-file. And now c6, taking away the d5 square from Capablanca's knight here. And now rook 8 to e1. We have king to f8 by Kostić, just preparing bishop here, so the king will be helping out with the defense of the rook here, as Kostić is preparing bishop to d8 to trade some rooks along the e-file. And here Capablanca plays the very interesting bishop to f4, which pretty much saves him the bishop pair, because now it's a very tricky position. For example, if you play a silly move like h6, already Capablanca is prepared to capture on e7, and after you capture, bishop captures on d6, pins the rook, it's already attacked twice, and after you defend it, rook to e8, Capablanca would just trade here and then go knight e5 and enjoy this position that is better being a pawn up. Of course, he would enjoy that very much. So here you have to decide how to prevent that. One of the options is d5, but d5 still allows Capablanca to go for this rook captures on e7, even though it doesn't win a pawn. But maybe it would be a bit better for Kostić, as it leaves him the option of at least eliminating the bishop whenever he wants to, but he doesn't really need to, as the pawns really create a nice tomb for this light square bishop. But okay, Kostić decides to defend it in a different way. We have knight to b7, guarding the d6 pawn. And okay, the game continues. We have h3, Capablanca keeps his bishop pair. With h6, black also creates some breathing room for his king, and now bishop back to h2. With bishop to d8, now offering a trade of rooks, Capablanca decides, okay, with rook captures, bishop captures, and now comes a4. a nice flank attack on the queen side, and Kostić of course ignores this. He goes for c5, preparing c4, and Capablanca finds a nice idea to refute this idea. He plays knight to e4. Now the main line, which of course we have to ask ourselves what happens when black pushes c4, Kostić did not go for this, but if c4, Capablanca's idea was knight captures on d6, and after c captures on b3, knight captures on b7. And now after b captures on c2, now you can go captures on b5, and if captures on b5, then you get captures, captures, and rook to c1. And probably at some point, even if the pawn is defended, you're going to go knight e2, win this pawn, and Capablanca would most likely go into this being a pawn up. So Kostić doesn't like this. He doesn't go c5, he finds a different idea. Knight captures on e4, but now Capablanca doesn't capture immediately, because now c4 is actually very strong. So here Capablanca found an even better idea than recapturing immediately. So of course you see the move. Maybe you want to pause the video and find it. But, you know, I'm pretty sure you don't have to, as you do see the move. The move is bishop to d5. Congratulations, as I know everyone saw it. It attacks this knight, it attacks this knight, so it was a bit of a temporary piece sacrifice, but very soon you will recapture it. So what do you do here? It's really a tough position. This knight is under attack, and this knight is under attack. And if both knights move, then nothing is defending the d6 pawn. So bishop captures on d6 would also be an idea. This knight cannot move. The rook is behind the knight, so a very tricky position. For example, one option is to play f5, give up the b7 knight. But here, after bishop captures on b7, you will get rook a7, and now bishop captures on e4. F captures on e4, and now bishop captures on d6 with check. Bishop e7, you will capture with check, and after rook captures, you will go knight d2, go after this pawn. C captures, A captures, you will get bishop captures on b5, and now rook captures on e4, and you will get this position where Capablanca has 2 pawn islands, Kostić has 3 pawn islands, and Capablanca is up a pawn. So, of course, a better position for white. Kostić doesn't like this, so he doesn't go for f5, rather he goes rook to a7, defends the b7 knight, and also gets his rook out of this nasty diagonal. With bishop captures on e4, and now bishop to e7, just defending this pawn here. You don't want to allow bishop captures, and then you lose the pawn. With a captures on b5, a captures on b5, d captures on c5, d captures on c5, and now an interesting idea by Capablanca, bishop to b8. Removing the defender of the knight here as the bishop attacks the knight, but it's not a problem, just rook a8, you also attack the bishop. And here, bishop back to g3. So, what's Capablanca's plan here? I'm sure Kostić was very interested in this as well, so he just repeats rook to a7, and Capablanca repeats again, bishop to b8 with rook to a8 and bishop back to g3. Kostić repeats, rook to a7, and now Capablanca doesn't repeat, he goes knight to e5. So basically what Capablanca did with this bishop b8 to g3 maneuver, he managed to get closer to time control, and also he improved his position. The bishop is no longer here, but rather here. The position is exactly the same. It's just that this bishop is now on g3, which creates some more breathing room for the king, and also the bishop is, you know, on a better square. So he improved his position without wasting time. Knight to e5 by Capablanca, with some ideas of going knight c6 with an attack on the rook and the bishop. And here we have knight to d8, just getting this knight out of the way. It's no longer a target, and also you guard the c6 square twice. With b3 by Capablanca, and now knight to e6, just increasing the activity of this knight. Bishop to d5 by Capablanca, and now knight to d4, going after the c2 pawn. So c3, pushing the knight back as the bishop is guarding the b3 pawn, and now knight to f5, again going after this bishop. And here Capablanca has to play it back, bishop to h2. So now, was the bishop to b8 followed by bishop to g3 maneuver all that great? It's hard to say, but Capablanca did play it. With b4 by black, and here Capablanca, before deciding where to capture or to close up the position on the queen side, first g4, pushes the knight back, knight to d6, and only now c4. And here something very interesting for us to see. Here, the pawns on the queen side from black are on dark squares, and white pawns are on light squares. So if Capablanca can somehow trade his light square bishop for his opponent's light square bishop, that would be great, because then Capablanca's dark square bishop would have targets, whereas his opponent's dark square bishop will not have targets, as Capablanca's pawns here are on light squares. It's not much to go on, but it is something. Here, by pushing c4, Capablanca also weakens the b3 pawn, as now it's a backwards undefended pawn. Kostić goes for it, rook to a3. Capablanca, of course, defends it, rook to e3, and now knight to c8. Just remaneuvering the knight, with bishop to b7, attacking the knight, knight to a7 now. With bishop back to d5, and here we have f6. You don't want to allow this pawn to remain a target with some rook to f3 ideas. So f6 first, pushing the knight back, knight to f3, and now knight back to c6. Now the knight is nicely placed. From there it can go here. It can go to a5 and serve as an additional attacker to the b3 pawn. And here Capablanca has to decide how is he going to defend the b3 pawn. Now, you don't want to capture the knight here and give up your bishop pair, as, I mean, it's very useful to have it in such a nice endgame. The plays on both sides of the board, but also how do you defend the b3 pawn? It's a very, very nice idea. Here, Capablanca did it by knight to h4. So how do you defend the b3 pawn by playing knight to h4? Well, the idea is next. Here we have knight to d4. Now the knight can also attack the pawn from here, as the knight is no longer guarding the d4 square. But now knight to f5. Attacking the knight, attacking the bishop here. The bishop is attacked twice, so here you kind of do have to trade. With knight captures on f5, g captures on f5, and now bishop to d7. This pawn is under attack, so bishop to e4 by Capablanca, everything is in check, and now rook to a6. Kostić has to wait and see what Capablanca will do. We have rook to d3, and now what do you play here? Here Kostić played bishop to c6, but there aren't all that many active moves he can play, and Capablanca was very happy to enjoy this trade. Bishop captures, rook captures, and here king to g2. Capablanca starts bringing his king into the game, and here you can see that he was successful. Like we mentioned, he was able to trade light square bishop, so now Capablanca's dark square bishop has targets here, whereas Kostić dark square bishop does not have targets, as Capablanca's pawns on the queen side are on light squares. So how will Capablanca go about this? First, Kostić goes rook to a6. The b3 pawn is still a weak target, so if at any point Capablanca's rook moves, Kostić is going to go after it. With king to f3, now going for some increased activity with the king, and here rook to a2. Kostić does not allow this king to move any further. You have to keep an eye on the f2 pawn, but bishop to g3, just defending the pawn. With king to e8, Kostić also wants to increase the activity of his king, although it's not all that easy to do. And after Kostić played this king to e8 move, it was in this position on move 51 that the game was adjourned. So I believe the games started at 2 p.m. and lasted up until 8 p.m. So 6 hours of play, and then the games would be continued the other day in the morning. So here it was in this position that the game was adjourned. So Kostić went home, Capablanca went home. They each had their rest, analyzed the game, analyzed the endgame, and of course came the next day prepared, or did they? We're going to discuss this a bit more, but later. So here Capablanca played bishop to f4 in this position. It's interesting, if Capablanca starts increasing the activity of his king a bit too much, let's say king e4, which seems like a very natural move, then you can get rook e2 check, and after king d5, seems like your king is on such a nice square, king d7, and now you can no longer move your king anywhere. All of the squares for your king are taken by either black rook or the pawns, and it's very hard to see how you would make progress here. So Capablanca goes for a different plan with bishop to f4, and now rook back to a6. Kostić just has to wait and see what Capablanca's plan is. With bishop to e3, with some ideas of attacking the c5 pawn here, and now rook back to a1. With king to g4 by Capablanca, and now rook back to a7. king to h5, going after g6. It would be a pretty big accomplishment if Capablanca managed to get his king over to g6. Now comes king to f7. Of course, Kostić prevents this. We have rook to d5, now with a double attack against the c5 pawn. And here Kostić can go rook c7, but then both his bishop and rook are pretty much stuck guarding the c5 pawn for the rest of the game. And Capablanca will have all the time in the world to improve his position as much as he wants. He can go h5, king g4, he can push the pawn to h5, he can start bringing his king into the game, move the rook somewhere, play king d5, and it's gonna be a lot of activity for white with no moves to play for black. So here, Kostić decides to go for the active defense. Rook to a3, again going after the weak pawn here. Capablanca here, he has an option. He can go bishop c5 or rook d7. It's interesting, Capablanca doesn't like bishop captures on c5. Here you have to capture the bishop because rook d7 attacks the pinned piece. It's all over. So here we would see a trade, and if rook captures on b3, rook c7 check, king e8, Capablanca would get the g6 square. Well, you can play h4 first, not allow this pawn to remain a target, then go g6, king captures or rook captures, and it seems like a very promising position for Capablanca. But Capablanca has a different plan. After rook a3, he goes rook d7 first, now threatens rook captures on c5, but here Kostić just kicks it back. The problem is, of course, you cannot capture, because if you capture bishop captures here, you no longer have the e3 square to defend your bishop here, you would just lose the game. So Kostić pushes the rook back, king e8, and now we have rook back to d3. Now, again, just Capablanca defends the b3 pawn, king back to f7, h4, and now rook to a7, Kostić repeats. And here, rook to d5. So what do you play here? Now, if rook to a3, it's not all that great. If you play rook to a3 now, it's a bit different because after all is said and done, there is no pawn on h3 for black to target. So here you would just see the same variation, only much improved, for Capablanca. Bishop captures, rook captures here. Rook c7 check, king to e8 or f8, king g6, and now there is no target here, so white didn't have to waste a move on moving the pawn. And after rook f3, let's say going after the pawn, h5, you will capture the pawn here. Now rook f7 check, king e8, you can capture here, and after black starts pushing his passed pawn, you will just eliminate this pawn. On the next move, you're gonna go, for example, b2, rook b7, defend the queening square here, and you will be enjoying a winning king and rook endgame. So not all that great now that Capablanca already pushed the pawn to h4. It's a minor difference, but it is a big difference. So rook to a5, just defending, and here Capablanca creates a very nice triangulation with rook to d7, again not allowing the bishop to move, not allowing the rook to move due to bishop captures on c5. Here Kostić repeats, king e8 with rook to d3, king back to f7, and now rook to d5. So Capablanca got this exact same position, only now it's Kostić to move. So what do you move here? You can't move the rook, otherwise you're going to lose the pawn here, and we go into the line that we explained that was winning for white. If you try and lose a move with bishop to f8, let's say, then again rook d7 check, king g8, you're going to go king g6, and again, black isn't getting anything, and Capablanca is just getting a much better and better position. So after rook d5, Kostić decided to go into the line that isn't all that great for him. He played rook to a3, and now we get bishop captures on c5. Bishop captures the line that we already shown, rook captures, rook c7 check, king to f8, and now king to g6. Not having to worry about the pawn, on h3. With rook to f3 by Kostić, rook to f7 check, king to e8, rook captures on g7. So everything like we've shown. Now the difference is rook to f4 goes after the c4 pawn with h5, defending the h4 pawn, and now rook captures on c4. So Kostić now has a passed pawn that he's ready to push, but Capablanca will also create one. With king captures on h6, now comes king to f8, and now rook to b7, putting the rook behind the passed pawn, and now rook to g4. With f3 by Capablanca, trying to push this rook away from the defense of the b4 pawn, rook to g5, and now rook captures on b4. And here, a beautiful idea why it's not okay to capture the f5 pawn. If Kostić plays rook captures on f5, then you get king g6, rook captures on f3, and now rook to b8 check. king to e7, and now comes h6. And now after rook to g3 check, king to f5, rook to h3. Now the idea becomes clear. Of course, here the winning move is h7. And there's no way to prevent the pawn from queening. And of course, if you capture it, rook b7 check wins the rook and of course the game. So very interesting how Capablanca knew this, of course, and he said, okay, you cannot capture here, you should just either move your rook or play with the king. So Kostić played king to f7, but now comes rook to g4. Capablanca forces now black to either trade rooks. Of course, this will be a losing king and pawn endgame for him, so he forces him to capture the f5 pawn. Now comes f4, and now rook to a5. Capablanca goes rook to g7 check, king to f8, and now rook to b7. And now the king is ready to go up the board, and the pawns will also start marching forward. With f5 from Kostić, and now king to g6. Rook to a6 check, king captures on f5, there was nothing better. Rook to a5 with king to g4, now comes rook to a6, and now king to g5. Rook to c6, now comes f5 from Capablanca with king to g8 and now f6. Rook to c8 with rook to g7 check with king to f8 and now h6. And it was in this position that Borislav Kostić resigned the game, as there is nothing more to do here. Whatever you play, let's say you go rook c5 check, you'll go king g6, and after rook c1, hoping for some checks, you're gonna get h7. Rook g1 check, you can go king h6, rook h1 check, and now king g5. So here doesn't matter what you do. Let's say rook g1 check, king to f4, and now you either capture, but it isn't enough because first white queens. Here you can go here, and then it's gonna be a quick game for white after this position. Or after king to f4, instead of capturing, you can go rook to h1. But again, just rook g8 check, and after the king moves, now you queen the pawn. And again, nothing to do here. You will have to capture. White is up a rook, and of course winning. Kostić knew all this, so after this king f8 and h6, he resigned the game. And a very impressive showing from Borislav Kostić, even though you know, it was pretty much a drawish endgame for the drawish game for the entire game, but little by little, Capablanca was able to create some chances, get some sort of a Zugzwang going on, and in the end, he prevailed. So, first win ever by Capablanca over Borislav Kostić after 4 incredible draws, like we said, 2 in the 1916 and 2 in the 1918 tournament. So this is only first game from this match. We're gonna check out all the games from the match, and I do hope you're gonna enjoy them, because this is just a prelude to the match with world champion Emanuel Lasker. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Emir Zečić, Jagan Vaman, Rod Smith, Melanie Klein, and Lionel Manuel Tarazon Alcoher for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the Capablanca saga, checking up on your suggestions, and so on. Thank you all. I will see you soon. Have an excellent rest of your day.